Hey guys. So
Is the software? Yeah.
Is there a clicker?
Hey everyone. So my name's Devin. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of OpenSea. Just to get a quick read from the room, how many of you guys have heard of OpenSea? Okay, so a good percentage. So a little background on us. We are a marketplace for crypto items on the blockchain. So we allow you to buy and sell any item in any blockchain game. We started out with CryptoKitties, but as we all know, over the last year since we started in 2017, we've seen an explosion of the number and sort of diversity of assets that are on a blockchain. And I think one really important thing to know about our product is it's not there's no such thing as building on OpenSea. Really all developers have to do is build on a blockchain, and instantaneously we allow buying and selling of any ERC 721 assets. So you're not wedded to the OpenSea platform in any capacity. You're just building items that are tradable. So we have 4 million collectibles on our site. We aggregate data from Ethereum at the moment, but we're going to be supporting new blockchains pretty soon. We have 200 games, and we're the biggest marketplace sort of in this pure decentralized marketplace category at the moment. So today so as a marketplace, we've seen a lot of projects come through. So we've seen, we can kind of predict what makes a project destined for success, and then we've also seen a lot of projects that have shut down and decided not to continue. So we can sort of figure out what are the ingredients that lead to a successful blockchain game. So those are the lessons I'm going to be sharing today. So I think the first lesson is sort of understand what you're getting into and understand why you're building on blockchain. I actually think this is an underrated lesson. A lot of people have trouble articulating why it's important to, or why it's interesting to build on a blockchain. There's these ideas of true ownership, but I don't think true ownership encapsulates all of the benefits of a blockchain. And so I think sort of understanding the trade-offs is really important. And in our mind, building on a blockchain is essentially the difference between a closed, isolationist economy and a open free market economy. So with traditional games, you sort of manage everything about the game. You manage supply of your resources. You don't allow imports. There's not imports from other games. There's no exports. There's no international trade. And that's actually a pretty big burden for game developers who are trying to manage these relatively complex economies. On the other hand, centralized games have a big market. They have smooth, optimized UX that has been iterated on for decades, and users are familiar with how to use them. So blockchain games are like building open economies, right? You can have complex financial derivatives built on top of your assets. You can have entrepreneurship in your economy. You can have international trade, imports, exports. And so you get all of these things, but sort of the trade-off at the moment is that you're dealing with a pretty small market, right? There's not that many people playing blockchain games. The UX is terrible, as we all know, and you're losing potentially control of your IP. So there's all these very real trade-offs that happen when you decide to build on a blockchain. And I think getting comfortable with what it is you're trying to do and what that's going to sacrifice is actually really important when you start to build a blockchain game. And the games that we've seen be sort of, in some ways, least successful, treat the blockchain as a database. So if you treat the blockchain as a database, you'd say, well, why put users through the trouble of downloading MetaMask? Instead, let's sort of abstract away the blockchain. Let's have hosted wallets. And at the end of the day, you've built a game, and you realize that blockchain is actually a pretty terrible database. You might as well just use Postgres, right? So if you're just treating the blockchain as another database, you're sort of getting all of the you're getting all the benefits of centralized games in terms of user experience, but you're missing out on all of the benefits of blockchain games in terms of open economies. And that can be successful if you built a good game, but it's not really an experiment in a new platform. Then I think the most important thing we've noticed is understanding that liquidity is sort of a new feature of blockchain games. So as I think the Wax guy talked about earlier, what we've seen is that the demand for liquidity actually leads to higher value of assets. So it's a somewhat counterintuitive phenomenon for people from centralized gaming world, but what we've actually seen in the market is that users demand immediately liquid assets. So this is a user in one of the Discords, and he's saying, what price do we expect for Genesis Land? When is it going to hit OpenSea? When can we actually trade it? And this next quote is really telling. So this user says, I made a promise not to buy cards until we can sell them on OpenSea. I'm going to keep to it, and then the moment that they're tradable, I'm going to buy a ton and promote the heck out of the game. So the phenomenon here is basically, if you think about an asset that you hold, you're more willing to value it higher if you know that you can trade it at some point in the future. And we've really seen that phenomenon take place in an environment where you can have these immediate speculative liquid markets even before you launch the game. And I think it's table stakes, right? Having your assets tradable is instantaneous with tools like OpenSea, and it's basically a requirement for blockchain games at this time. So number 4 is, I think a lot of people, this one is kind of an obvious one, but value doesn't immediately come from having liquidity, right? So when we were starting OpenSea back in late 2017, the first wave of projects were literally just marketplaces. So there were like crypto puppies, like crypto atoms. There were sort of these CryptoKitties clones, and the idea was that if we allow people to trade these things, like we'll actually have an interesting game and we'll make money off of the marketplace transactions. That didn't work at all. So you need your items to be valuable in some context. You need, if you're building a game, you need an actual game. But I think there are a lot of clever ways that you can build valuable assets that maybe aren't obvious at first glance. So here's a project called CryptoStamp. And what CryptoStamp did was, they're actually a project from the Austrian Postal Service, and they send you a physical stamp alongside a collectible digital stamp. And this was an interesting way to tether the value of that digital collectible to an existing physical asset. And these actually did really well in OpenSea. They sort of engaged the stamp collector community. There was a lot of trading of them. And it was an interesting way to just create a pure collectible that isn't usable, but because it's tied to a physical asset, actually has value. Then number 5 is, we think that blockchain allows you to engage a new set of participants in games. So there's now players of decentralized games that maybe are only interested in the trading component of the game, and maybe not even interested in the gameplay itself, but are treating these things as more of an investment. And we actually think that's a great utility that new entrants can provide. So market making becomes a lot easier when assets are instantly tradable, and you can actually, if you're good at it, you can make a profit in a lot of these games. So here's a blogger who goes by the name DCL Blogger, and he basically talks about how to value Decentraland land. I don't know if he's a big gamer or not, but he's basically made a living figuring out how to flip virtual land, and he's published his results for people to see, and he's engaging in this game without actually, Decentraland doesn't have a game yet, but without actually necessarily playing or participating in the gameplay of the game. Number 6 is, we've seen projects reinvent the wheel hundreds of times. So a classic example of this is and sometimes this makes sense, but in a lot of cases, it might not make sense to build a marketplace for your game, right? If you're trying to launch quickly, you could just ship out the assets, allow them to be traded on open marketplaces, and sort of test your game a lot more quickly without having to go and build all of the sort of auction mechanics, smart contracts, filtering, sorting, searching. That's really not a core part of your game. And I think not reinventing the wheel is one of the most important mindsets of an experimental space. You don't want to be building a wallet, a marketplace, and all of those infrastructural things if your focus is really like the gameplay of a game. So I think it's crazy to go and build another wallet when we have MetaMask and we have a host of people all working on the problem of better user experience for Ethereum. And we do have a long ways to go, but I think all of these projects will help push the space forward. And so here's a great example of that. So we worked with Animoca on their Formula One Delta Time auctions. So they, so basically this was a white labeled version of OpenSea. You can see on the left there, the car is embedded inside of the F1 Delta Time site. But these are powered through the OpenSea smart contracts. So all that F1 Delta Time had to do, we obviously worked with them really closely around customizing the look and feel, but from a technical perspective, all they had to do was create an asset in their account and then put it on sale. They didn't have to rebuild, they didn't have to write any smart contracts to build the auction system. It's literally a public utility, right? Being able to trade around these assets. And I think taking advantage of that fact will lead you to be able to move faster and not have to sort of worry about the underlying tech as much as you would if you built everything from scratch. And then the beautiful thing about this is these tools can have symbiotic relationships. So in the case of marketplaces, when you build a marketplace on OpenSea, for example, we allow you to take a cut of every secondary sale fee. So if someone buys your item and then sells it at a markup, you actually get a percentage of that sale. So there's the trade-off, actually, the equation changes, right? Instead of the build versus buy being build will allow us to monetize and buy won't, actually using a third party will still allow you to monetize secondary markets. So we think that's a really exciting component of blockchain. It's something that would be really hard to do in a centralized ecosystem where you don't have this sort of native value transfer. And as a case study, we work with a game called My Crypto Heroes, which is one of the most popular games on Ethereum. And these guys decided not to build a marketplace and just leave it up to OpenSea. A few stats, they've had 4,000 ETH in volume on their marketplace, over 7,000 secondary sales, and then they've earned over 600 ETH just by allowing people to trade on OpenSea. So they didn't have to integrate with us, they didn't have to be exclusive with us. All they did was they put their items on the blockchain, and then I don't think they even told people to sell on OpenSea. People just did it. And then they set their secondary sale fee and were able to monetize that. So again, it's zero platform risk, but an ability to monetize these secondary markets and tools that are sort of become these public utilities. And then lastly, I just want to say, I think if you dive deep into blockchain games, you'll realize that there's this famous quote that's like, the future is already here, it just hasn't been evenly distributed. I think something like that is sort of true for blockchain games. The future is already here, it's just very hard to use, very primitive, very slow. But as an example, here's a game called CryptoVoxels. So CryptoVoxels is a lot like Decentraland, for those of you who are familiar with that. And it's basically a world where you can own virtual land and build on it Minecraft style. So the guy sells all of his land on OpenSea. He's one developer, and he's basically made this virtual world where you can import your CryptoKitties. So actually, you can import any of your NFTs. So people have created virtual museums in this world. people are creating bars and restaurants and things like that, and the digital assets that they own on the blockchain are already available for use. So it's pretty cool. You guys should check it out. So our handle is at OpenSea, and I'm at Finzer on Twitter.
Thank you very much. That's great.